Yeah.
Right, well, good evening, councillors. And a chair for the absent member of the public. Right, we'll crack straight on with apologies for absence. I think there's an apology from Councillor Chesser.
I'm not quite sure about the other
And
two.
Councillor Clark.
Oh, yes.
And Councillor Davis is probably still indisposed. Do we accept those apologies?
Yes.
Representations from interested parties, there are none. Declarations of interest, any disclosable pecuniary interests or other interests, Councillor Shura?
I know the writer, Molly Bickenstaff, of the letter that is on the agenda.
Oh, right. Yes, okay. Note it as an other interest when we get there. Minutes of the meeting held on the 25th of February have been circulated. Present myself, Councillor Chesser, Councillor Clark and Councillor Shura. So 2 of us were there. Councillor Shura, have you read these minutes and are you happy to propose them?
I don't have, I've got my computer, but don't worry, I've read everything, David, and yes, I'm happy with them.
Fine. Well, I'm also happy with them, so if we just indicate that we're happy, right, I will sign. Well, that takes us straight on to the various planning applications. The first of which is for a replacement double garage, and on the screen is a picture of it. If it could move slightly up so we can see the bottom of it. Yeah, well, there you go. Councillors will recall the building as soon as they see that. We had an application before us, we made some observations, it was withdrawn, it was replaced with a different application and got permission. But we'll come back to the main structure when we get on to the next item on the agenda. But this is for a replacement garage. And in practice, there's already a garage on site, but it looks smaller in terms of the location plan. So there's the location plan, and right at the sort of top back is a small building, which is the current garage. And in fact, the site plan for the new one essentially shows it in the same place, but bigger, so closer to the property. And there indeed it is. If we go back to those ones we had up earlier and move across again. So there we get a view of the garage where you've got twin garage doors and then what appears to be a third door located on our left-hand side as we look at it. The property, find my notes. Yeah. So within the application, I think it makes it clear that the whole overall site is some 1,000 square metres. The house occupies 180 square metres, including extension. This garage was 95 square metres, so there's still 725 square metres of garden land left. So it's effectively 3/4 of the thing is still going to be garden land. And on my notes, I've made reference to the previous applications, which I touched on a minute ago. As I put it in my note, the application form itself could have been clearer, but it appears that this garage is going to be brick built with what is described as black standing seam metal cladding with a pitched roof of black standing seam metal cladding and single prime membrane. Windows are in aluminium in dark grey, brown and black. The single door to the front would also be of dark grey, brown aluminium. And then the twin doors are slightly different again. The only comment that I saw on the portal when I was doing this last week was a neighbour concerned about surface water drainage who sought a planning condition to address that issue. NNC Highways had indicated no objections, but then rather bizarrely set out its usual standards for access to a building. Well, the access is unchanged. The access is what the access currently is. So I'm not quite sure why NNC have done that, unless the owners are going to discover that they build the whole thing and then NNC leaps up and down about the adequacy of the access, but I don't think it's an issue for us. Bearing in mind the way that building is sort of oriented, instead of the house being sort of front on to the road, it runs sideways to the road, and the garage is therefore behind that. So to a degree, it's actually kind of sheltered from the property. And again, on the sort of, on the bottom right now, you can see the garage relative to where the main structure of the building will be, with which is becoming a smaller gap, as it were, between the two. Comments, observations, worries?
I've got no comments.
Nothing?
The neighbour, as you rightly say, I don't know which property the neighbour's in, has raised this concern about surface water, which kind of, I wasn't entirely sure I understood that, because presumably, will they not have guttering around the roof and presumably either a butt or going into a drain of some sort? Is that not part of the proposal?
It's interesting. I mean, often with these things, there is reference to rainwater goods, and it talks about guttering and so on. There's nothing about that in the planning application. There's no reference to it. And looking at the drawing, you don't really see anything. I'm assuming that the concerned person is the one, if you like, at the bottom.
Well, presumably where that water's going to go off the back there.
Yeah, so looking at the sloping roof, as it were, if it just runs off the sloping roof, and because of its proximity to the boundary, it might affect the neighbouring property. And it might be a reasonable point to make that there isn't anything in the planning application to indicate what rainwater goods, if any, are supplied, or quite how drainage will take place. And
that goes all the houses along that road. I mean, you've got the estate garden, haven't you?
yeah,
Which I walk this quite a lot. So you've got the estate garden in your estate, you've got these houses at the top. I mean, I can't see an issue in that, but we could stipulate that.
well,
Drainage. I mean, if someone's put an objection, you've got to think.
I mean, one would anticipate that obviously they've seen that objection anyway, but no doubt if we were to say, well, look, given that there is this concern, we just want them to be satisfied.
Yeah, I think that's all I'm saying is
that there isn't an issue, but otherwise I can't see any reason to worry about
So
any
on
of
top
it.
of it is the water will flow down, so that's the issue.
Yes.
So there's no flooding in the area at all.
No, and of course there is already a garage
Yeah.
in.
yeah, I think what they're concerned about is the
Location, but I
larger
think-
space that it's taking up.
Yes,
Or more
and
runoff.
probably it may be that there's a greater pitch to the roof and everything else in the way it's done. So maybe with just that one comment, no objection, but
Yeah,
an
I agree.
observation.
I agree.
I'm happy with that. I like it, no objection, but.
Who said there's a lawyer in the room? Right, well, we're going to stick with this property because
Yeah.
the next application is interesting. They're not often interesting where it's an application to vary a condition. But this one arguably is a bit. It's an application essentially to build not in stonework, but in brickwork, albeit of a similar colouring. And when it talks about substituting drawing X for drawing Y, in fact, as far as I can tell, literally the only difference is that the original drawing has markings on it that make it look as if it's constructed out of stonework, and the new one doesn't, thereby reflecting the fact that it's brickwork. And I guess the question that arises is, if we'd seen this application originally,
Would we?
with it being built in brick as opposed to stone, would we have, for example, said, well, hang on, the main structure is stone, so is the structure, again, that rather modern-looking structure attached to an old building, and it still strikes me as it looks pretty odd, but will it look even odder if it's now done in brickwork as opposed to stone, which at least has some kind of relationship to the existing structure? I guess that's the question for us, as simple as that.
Yeah. Good. After you.
Well, to be honest, Blackthorn Road is a hodgepodge of different types of materials and houses and everything else. And it's not a conservation. If every house was like stone, then I would say I'd check. But because it's like red brick, brown brick, stone, does it matter?
I mean, it's a fair point because you're right, the street does feature many different styles. It's perhaps only the fact that it is attached to a stone-built building.
Well, I was going to say something very similar, and that is, it's outside of the conservation area. That's the key thing. Hodgepodge, I think, is a good word. I was going to say it's very mixed, but yes, a hodgepodge is indeed the case. There are some really quite modern buildings and some not quite so modern. I was just going to ask, do we know anything about the age of the original building? It's not listed, I think, is it?
It's not a listed building.
And it looks like quite an attractive building, but the point is it's not a protected building of any sort, is it?
It's neither protected by virtue of listing nor indeed by virtue of being in the conservation area. So, and whether it is buff brick or buff stone, it is probably relatively sympathetic in colour, or at least if one looks at the drawing, it is. I think we may remember another property in Blackthorn Road on the other side of the road, which is quite a large and imposing building, that I think stands out rather more than we had anticipated, shall we say, because it's quite difficult sometimes to look at one of these artist's impressions and actually figure out what it's going to look like constructed.
The other point perhaps to make is that, as I think you already observed, this house isn't face on to the road, it's at 90 degrees to the road, isn't it? And the extension is again further from the road, so it's not actually going to be that noticeable anyway. So I think what I'm coming to say is I don't really see that there's a point for objecting.
It's a good point to raise, though.
Well, my recollection was, and I should have checked it out, is that when the original application went in, one of the comments from a member of the public, presumably somebody living close to it, had been around construction materials. And they had, I think, been keen that it was done in brick. Well, I take on board everything. I mean, it is at 90 degrees to the road, so it's not as obvious as it otherwise would be. It is in an area where there is very mixed development anyway. And you could, I suppose, argue that given the very modernistic style of the extension, the fact that it's constructed in a somewhat different material to the original almost highlights that aspect of it rather than not. I don't think any of us are that concerned by it, so I think it's a no objection. The next one is an application by Oundle School in respect of a tree at the Great Hall, and there are two helpful photographs as part of this, so we can get to the documents and find the photographs in a moment. One will see that this tree is leaning at an angle and it leans across a pathway, which is why the school is talking about wanting to remove it. So we go to the photographs, and there are literally two, one taken from it, as it were, looking at it from either way. So that, I think, is from, if you like, within the curtilage of the Great Hall, and the other one is looking, as it were, into it from the other side. And there again, you see that the tree is literally projecting into the pathway.
Lots of kids on there.
The school makes the point, although you don't see it that well from the photographs, that it is a tree within a sort of a little copse of trees at that end. On the actual sort of location plan, they kind of show the copse in a little bit more detail. But it is, of course, not a protected tree. It is before us because it is situate within the conservation area. And councillors will recall that in essence, therefore, the presumption is more or less you can do whatever you like unless it transpires that there is something about the tree which would suggest that it should become subject to a TPO, in which case doing things to it would require, if you like, an additional level of scrutiny. Well, I can't see any reason why that tree would become subject to a TPO, personally. And
it's a heavily used path.
it is a heavily used path.
It's probably one of the more heavily used paths because it's the way to the convent, and it's the bit where you go from the Great Hall to all the other places as well. You go down to the church. It's actually one of the major routes through for the kids to use. So you've got hundreds and hundreds of kids using it every day and stuff. I think it needs to go.
I mean, it looks, I don't like to call trees a nuisance, but it does look a bit like a nuisance. And it's not a particularly special tree.
It's a shame, but there are ones.
And it's surrounded by other trees. I don't think it's going to change the character of the area at all. Absolutely.
And it's behind the wall.
Yeah.
You won't see it from the road.
Yeah,
not from the road, no.
It's only from the viewpoints where the photographs were taken that you really get any impression of it.
Which is private.
And you could argue that it's not a particularly favourable impression that you get because you see this thing and it's wonky. It literally does lean across the road.
It's a far place to do.
Okay,
I'm fairly close to it to notice it.
No objection to that, which moves us on to what is now another of our old friends almost, the old post office at New Street, which has its permission to be converted into a restaurant. And not surprisingly, therefore, along has come an application for a premises licence. You can't actually find this information on the planning portal. You have to go elsewhere to find it. But they are proposing to open on a daily basis from 11 in the morning until midnight. And they are looking for a license for Monday to Saturday from 11 till midnight and on a Sunday from 11 to 11. The kind of one observation that I have about this is, well, it does mean that on the face of it, you're serving alcohol right up to the moment that you close, which perhaps seems slightly unusual.
Have we discussed this?
That's why I'm confused. I'm quite sure we've seen this before.
We've allowed it because we were saying.
We talked about comparability with other.
Well, I thought we had looked at it, but it seems to have only just come up for comment, and it is on our agenda. But
But if we
you're
go
right.
back to the minutes, we even looked at.
We checked.
We sat here and checked when the
The
Rose and
talbot
Crown.
and the Rose and Down and
It's
such like.
Rose and Crown.
Yeah, but Ian did send an email to everybody saying when he got on the portal, there was another bit he was concerned about, because they said about how they're going to manage the outside seating area.
Oh, that's
smoking
different.
area.
Yeah, that's completely
Which
different.
of course is not the application that is, as it were, here.
But yeah, we did, we
Yeah.
approved the opening times, didn't we, and the Talbot opening times.
Basically, I would just refer us to the previous minutes.
Yeah.
Well,
And
my recollection was that certainly when we were looking at it before, or at least we were looking at a premises license, which, like you, I was pretty convinced had to be this, but then I thought, well, it can't be, because why would it be on the agenda again?
Yeah.
But we took the view that because of the other licensed premises in the area, we weren't going to object, so, you know, it would seem stunningly inconsistent.
Yeah, I mean,
at this
because
point,
we
suddenly
did-
made a point.
at the time, we looked at similar establishments, the Talbot and the Rose and Crown in particular, and established that they were clearly operating on a like basis.
Similar basis. Right, let's just say no objection and move swiftly on. I say move swiftly on, the next one is up there because it's one of these sort of
Did you know?
assumed permissions, I think one might best put it. And is therefore there for information, but of course the thing that struck me the moment I saw it was the word retrospective, which means they've already actually done the work, and then somebody pointed out that actually they should have sought permission to do it. So it seems like they're doing it the wrong way around. I guess, given the fact that we've put that it's for information only, if we said anything at all, it would perhaps only be to make our sort of standard comments about the fact that we
Yes.
are not happy about applications going in retrospectively, and people should make sure that they understand what is required of them and do it in the right way.
Yeah.
Just a bit of background to this. This gentleman came in to see me about this in a bit of a panic because he knew he was in a conservation area, but they had contacted NMC and been told and did have an email at some point saying they didn't need planning permission if they were going to put them in like for like. He's now selling his house, he was going through with his sale and obviously could not find this bit of information where he got confirmation from NMC didn't need planning permission. So in a flat panic, I said to him, the only thing you can do is contact NMC and apply for retrospective. So obviously this is what he's done.
Well, that's helpful background.
Yeah.
And perhaps equally there might have been an issue with a buyer's solicitor picking up on the fact that work had been done without seemingly permission. Well, I'm almost tempted against that background to say, well, let's not even mention the retrospective aspect of it, because it rather looks as if he was led to believe things in a way that turned out to be incorrect, and I've no reason to doubt that what he said to Lisa was true. So,
Lisa might see you.
well, exactly. And I mean, we would like to encourage people to come in and talk to us and try to make sure they're doing the right things. Well, perhaps all we should do is just note it
Yeah.
for these purposes. Right, and planning outcomes, absolutely none. I think that is the first time I can ever recall there being nothing to
I had
report.
to check about 3 times because I didn't trust it. I was like, that's never happened.
So it is very odd, but it does perhaps reflect the fact that in the last 3 or 4 meetings,
Very few.
there have been comparatively few applications. That's probably made a rod for our own backs for next month, because we can probably go bonkers now.
Do you think
Spring
people
is coming.
not got enough money?
I think there's a lot of apprehension about, and with the Chancellor going to say something on Thursday, I suspect that, rather depending on what comes out of that, there may be a further period of
Then how well are they doing on
restraint.
the one that's the promise?
They're back building at a pace again, aren't they? And my mum and dad went to have a look at the 2 bungalows that are near Ian. And I think they're both sold.
Oh, so they're saying they're back to,
They said something about a waiting list.
so anybody bought that share house, which is a ridiculously high price for a 4-bedroom.
We are slightly deviating from our agenda. Anyway, so there we are. Planning appeals. Interesting one. 16 Rockingham Hills. We may just vaguely remember this one, but essentially the planning authority did not grant permission. The applicant took it on appeal, and the appeal was no more successful. It failed. We had objected, so it is one of those cases where our kind of concerns about the whole thing seem to have been echoed at a higher level.
I remember this one.
So there we are. Interesting.
Green space.
The next item on the agenda relates to an application that we have already in fact considered. This was the application for a variation of conditions for the David Wilson site, essentially behind the cemetery, which councillors may recall essentially was kind of roadworks around the access, if I can term it that way. And we actually took a view that it wasn't justified. It appears the only real reason for doing it was a financial one. We said, well, this really doesn't seem to be a good enough reason. And interestingly enough, a member of the public made a very similar point, in fact. So we will wait and see as to whether or not the council is kind of robust about its conditions and not changing them unless there's a good reason, or whether in fact it takes a different view. But interesting to see that a member of the public seems to have A, had an interest to do it, and B, seems to have carried out a fairly similar analysis to our own.
Can I ask, what do you think, in your experience, would be the outcome of this? Just interesting.
I would hope that NNC would take it the same way that we did. But we don't really see enough of these. And so to see one where they're saying we want to do this for what appears to be commercial reasons, I can't say, oh, well, look, the last half dozen times this happened, the decision was X, because I don't recall seeing anything quite like it before. So the short answer is I don't really know.
No,
But I
thank
would
you.
like to think that they would say no, and make them either carry it out or come back with a much better argument as to why it should be delayed in the way they want it to. Right. That takes us on, and I've realised I forgot to print it off, to the email from David Wilson Homes regarding initial complaints about the development and about the section 106. Clearly, there we are. So, I think the short answer is we haven't had any complaints that I'm aware of regarding the initial works undertaken by David Wilson Homes. In fact, I find it ever so slightly strange that they write to us to ask us, well, have you had any? It's almost like they were expecting us to come back and say, yes, we've had half a dozen.
We've had one.
Yeah.
Did have one.
This is to do with them working in hours that were.
Oh, well, outside the construction and management plan. Yes, that's almost part of the course these days, it seems to me. Because they tend to routinely impose construction and management plans, usually with the same hour type restrictions. And then developers just carry on anyway, and it doesn't seem as if NNC has any teeth or sort of willingness to do much about it.
Very difficult to
So to the extent that we've had a complaint, if we haven't brought it to their attention, clearly we should. But as to the section 106, they're asking us if we're interested in taking on the land for the cemetery. I can't imagine why they would think that we wouldn't be. Throughout this whole exercise, we have emphasised the need for a cemetery extension and indeed repeatedly made observations that the amount of land that was being proposed was not in fact adequate and didn't meet what we had understood would be offered, going all the way back to our original abortive neighbourhood plan, which had made it clear that we wanted a significant extension, as it were, at the rear of the cemetery and stretching across what were the two pieces of land which were in separate ownerships. And of course, the land that is not David Wilson's Homes was the subject of a separate planning application and so on. So the short answer is yes, we do want to formally record that we do want the land transferring to us. I don't really think there's any need to have much of a discussion about it.
I think the wording was very curious. Can you go down to the bit of the letter that's from Pritesh? He says here, yes, secondly, before proceeding with this in writing, I wanted to inquire whether the town council is interested in taking on this land. And is he asking us to write back, kind of as Emma has done, saying, yes, we are? I mean, they clearly know that, so it's just an odd thing for them to
I
ask.
agree, it's utterly bizarre, because what he says is, well, if you don't want it, we'll just turn it into public open space. Well, of course we want it. I can't see how it could have been any clearer to them.
So we essentially asking the town clerk to action this, which he already seems to have done anyway.
I think she just wanted to run it past you, because I think this email might have come in. No, it's not in after your full council. Maybe she missed it off the full council one.
Well, I think it would have come, I think that came in
Yeah.
after the agenda had been published by the council, so I think that's probably why
I think
it's come
just
here.
that formality of saying
So
yes, we do.
It just needs this committee essentially to
That's my brother.
resolve that we ask them to initiate steps to transfer the whole of the land
Yeah.
to this council.
Yes.
Fine. That then moves us into an update on the request to set up a meeting with Lee Barron. As he puts it here, decide next steps. I have a meeting with the MP in this building at 3:45 on Friday afternoon. I haven't yet told my clients who I'm supposed to be seeing at 2:30 that I can't now see them because I'm seeing the MP at 3:45 in this building, but I am.
That's good.
There's no reason why any other member of the committee couldn't come along, quite frankly. I don't think he'd be fazed by the fact that there was more than one of us, if anybody wanted to attend.
I can't attend, I'm in Leicester, I'm afraid.
Right, okay. Well, the primary reason, of course, for setting this up had been to discuss what help, if any, he might feel able to give us in connection with our thoughts about revisiting the whole neighbourhood plan issue. Councillors will recall this has had a tortured history over many months since I first floated it, saying, well, we should go back to NNC, tell them that we're interested and tell them we want to work with them and so on, which was just met with a complete wall of silence. And even when I went through, I think both Helen Harrison and David Brackenbury, nothing has happened. No member of the planning committee has been in touch with this council or with me directly at all about it. So getting the MP to talk to us about the matter might mean that he would be prepared to contact the planning authority himself. And one would like to think that if the MP says to the planning authority, I would like you to engage with Elmwood Town Council, perhaps somebody would. And what I then would envisage is a meeting. Clearly, the ideal if they came to one of our committee meetings, but if they weren't in a position to send somebody along on a Tuesday evening, then it'll be a question of setting up a daytime meeting and somehow, we'll cover it. So there's that issue. But there are, in a sense, there is an opportunity to discuss with him any other issues that we as a planning committee might wish to bring to his attention. Now, it strikes me that within the context of our difficulties, raising concerns about the working relationship with the planning department and issues around enforcement and things like the construction management plan issues and so on. These are all areas that we could raise and see whether he is able to do anything at any level that might assist. This has also put up the letter that we received from Mrs. Bickerstaff,
Bickerstaff.
I haven't specifically mentioned.
Are we still
Embarrassingly, well,
are we still on the lead
well, I think we are.
This is to do with that,
Yeah.
Well,
Meeting as well, I think.
yeah.
Huddersfield.
I don't know whether the plan is that she's going to be there at the same time as whether or not, because I'm not clear about that. I realise, according to the minutes of the last meeting, supposed to have contacted this lady, mainly to say, look, it's not really a town council issue, this. But unfortunately, I forgot until I saw the minutes. Well, I saw the minutes shortly before full council last week, and somehow a whole week's gone by and I still haven't managed to do anything about it. And if the lady is meeting the MP on Friday, particularly if she's meeting him at the same time as I am, then an opportunity will be there to have a conversation generally. But the fact of the matter is that the Millers Field issue seems to be another one around issues around the way the planning department is operating, because there are just extraordinary delays in connection with it. And I can only assume it is down to staffing issues, that there are simply not enough people to do the jobs that need to be done, with the result that they either don't get done at all or they get done very late. And that's perhaps going to be more an issue to take up with our NNC councillors probably subsequent the 1st of May, when we will have at least 2 new councillors, because 2 of the existing ones aren't standing. And we can perhaps engage with them maybe more successfully than we've engaged hitherto, because whilst Ellen Harrison has been pretty responsive, it has to be said that the other 2 have not. Councillor Shore.
I think it's always useful to meet with local MPs for all sorts of reasons, because you can discuss wider issues. I'm just completely confused over why anybody is meeting and why we should meet in relation to Miller's Field, because as far as I understand it, we haven't seen an application to actually comment on. They have come to this meeting, or certainly to a town council meeting, whether it's planning or full council, on more than one occasion, I think, and presented which were no more than outline ideas. So it's not for us to comment. There's nothing for us to really comment on.
You're right, which is what I was going to say to the lady. Because it does seem to me that it is slightly premature.
I can see why she and others may be concerned, because they have actually given the company money in order to reserve their block, whatever. And they're thinking, well, we've handed over this money and nothing is happening. Well, that's nothing to do with us. That's between them and the company. And actually, I don't think it's got anything to do with NNC. I think it's the NNC is a red herring as well, because
the only way it would not be, and this is what I'm a little unclear about, is this. We know that developers routinely become involved in pre-application discussions with the planning department. It's an entirely normal scenario. Whether the concern is that the developer has become completely bogged down in that through no fault of its own, or not, I don't know. And if that's the issue, then it harks back to the problems in the planning department and the fact that if a parishioner reaches out to us to say, I am being adversely affected by this, can you add any weight to it? Of course, yes, we probably should attempt to get planners to deal with it. But if, on the other hand, as Councillor Shore says, in fact, the issue is, for some reason or another, at the developer's end, then it's not NNC's fault, and certainly then it's not for us to prod the developer into doing anything. The developer has been to talk to us. In fact, I've been around long enough to have seen the previous plans that were being developed originally by Mark Benz for the owners of Miller's Field. And we talked to him and to them about those. They then were not proceeded with. Then they got involved with this new company. As Max says, I think they've now done 2 separate presentations to us, the last of which was some considerable time ago. Yeah. And since then, everything has gone remarkably quiet. Now, I think the whole objective of those was to get some feedback from us in case they could amend their proposals in a way that they thought might be more likely to get us on board, because that's not uncommon. In fact, if you think back to 6A Blackthorn Road, we were talking about earlier, in their paperwork for the variation application, they made the point that in getting their substantive permission, they had initially put in an application, received observations from us and indeed from the planning authority, and taking those on board, withdrew their application and made a somewhat different one. So that whole process of listening to the town council and trying to reflect our views is perfectly normal. But as to quite where the hold-up is anybody's guess. And I don't see, I mean, given the conversation we've just had, quite how the MP is going to do anything in relation to this is beyond me.
Yeah.
I'm surprised he's even involving himself on the basis that this is a development that has not been given approval as yet. It may not.
But it
And
doesn't
if he
really
gets
ask.
behind it, it's almost suggesting that he's somehow approving something that is not as yet formal.
Well, it comes back to, what is the real issue? Is the issue with the developers dragging their feet for some reason, good or bad? Or is it that there is some problem with the planning department? But it does seem to me, and I think I said this when this first raised, well, if you're a developer and you're engaged in pre-application discussions, and for whatever reason they completely stall, isn't the answer to put in an application? Because at that point you force them to do something, because they're at timescales, they have to deal with planning applications. Admittedly, they still don't always comply with those timescales, but at least it is in the system, and ultimately it has to be dealt with. Whereas if you simply allow the thing to drag on indefinitely, well, it could drag on indefinitely. So it's most bizarre, but I regard it very much as a back burner issue from the point of view of this council and that meeting with the MP. David?
Well, we part that one, so let's think back to Lee Barron. Planning, well, as you know, we've got this new government act coming in, and there's an opportunity for us to find out if you can tell us anything. The issue with that is, this is from NAUC and NCALC, so the worry from the NAUCs is the fact that although the noises from the MPs are very positive about parish and town councils being fully involved and not changing what they do and everything else, when you actually look at the published documentation, there ain't a lot in it about what town and parish councils are going to be doing, etc., and what their role is. So it could be a bit of clarification from the point of view in terms of what our remit of planning is. If you could let us have any hints. And I think it's an opportunity to get a taster of what the plans are within this new bill that's going to happen and be approved, and see how it affects what we do in this new plan. What differences is it going to make? Is it going to make any difference? Is it going to give us a little bit more power? Are they going to, because there's a whole raft of things happening where the feeling I'm getting is they want to obviously give town and parish councils a bit more opportunity to take on responsibilities. And as we mentioned this, we mentioned it in the full council about transport, taking a bit more responsibility for transport. And the impact and how we can sort that. So, I mean, that's just something I'm saying. It is a slight concern. Most people in that are very positive about it. But with that concern, there's not enough information.
I mean, my concern is actually that there are two different things here. We're talking about sort of apples and pears. Talking about transport and the like, the impression I get is, oh goody, if we can get it down into parish levels, it's coming out of there. And so that takes a bit of pressure off other parts of the system.
There's still support. The idea, I went to a strategic meeting the other day and we were talking to one of the NNC people who's leading this. And she made it plain that it's not like that. It's going to be one of those things where you decide what you want and then work with the council to decide what they take.
You know what, I'll believe that when I see it.
Well, and that's what she said, like a brief for discussing. So.
Well, it sounds fine. I'll wait to see if that's the way it works. But I think that in terms of planning, the impression one gets is that all the government is interested in is how do we make it as easy as possible to get as many grants of planning permission as we possibly can, regardless of whether there is local concern or opposition.
Yes, that's the question.
And that feels to me more like us being sidelined than us becoming involved.
That's very worrying.
And that does worry me.
Well, it's something to ask.
Because it seems to me to go against the whole idea of localism and the rest of it. And they talk about local democracy and they talk about improving local government by, rearranging some of the
All
things.
they actually mean is regional.
But that's actually moving it arguably further away from the people, because the bigger blocks you get, the risk is the less local communities get a say, unless town and parish councils get a proportionately bigger voice. Now, I'm quite happy to advocate for that happening.
I know, I could do it just quickly then. Again, from the now thing. The big problem there is if you're a city, it's all about population. So it's not done on geography, it's done on population density. So there's something you mentioned Liverpool. So Liverpool, you'll get your 250,000 in a mile radius. But if you're in Shropshire, you have to add other counties to make the same sort of density, whatever it is, population. Well, that's completely different. And that's where the weakness in this plan is, as you were saying, you're going to have regional variations across three counties. That's what they're really worried in Shropshire, Worcestershire. And we're going to be part of Bedfordshire, aren't we, supposedly?
Yeah, I mean, clearly we've got to be a bit careful because we are a planning committee and we should be looking at it purely from planning aspects, although there are much wider aspects at play. I mean, in terms of one or two small, very planning specific issues, one, I have always felt that there should be a much bigger statutory role for councils like ourselves in connection with Section 106 agreement.
Yes.
Whereby we don't seem to have any role to play. Doesn't matter what we want. We don't seem to get any say in structuring it or where the money goes or anything else. Well, why not? So there's that. I've always felt that people who put in retrospective planning applications, perhaps our recent parishioner excluded because of the circumstances, should have to pay a fairly heavy economic price for it. And it seems to me that there should be a significant penalty behind making applications for retrospective permissions, which would be a very easy change to make, as indeed would arguably involving town and parish councils with a proper role within Section 106's, both issues which I would be happy to raise with the MP if given the opportunity and provided other councillors feel that it would be appropriate.
You've hit the two on the nail. You hit on the nail on the head, sorry. Honestly, they are the two things that drive you mad, that drive us mad.
They drive us mad. It's been a perpetual sort of issue for years and years and years. If either of you, or indeed any members of the planning committee who are absent tonight, do have any thoughts about anything that I could raise with Mr. Barron, please email me prior to Friday. And if I get the opportunity, I will do it. I can really only spend an hour with him because I have to get back for a work-related thing at 5 o'clock. I need to be on a Teams meeting. But you can potentially cover a lot of ground in an hour. And he might not even have that long himself. We'll just have to see what happens. So that's the report on that item of the agenda, which was to, I think, update you on where we were with it and decide next steps. And I think we have canvass the next steps. So there's only one other matter on the agenda, which is any other relevant matters for report. Councillor Fuller? Councillor Shaw?
Yeah, we talked about the old post office earlier on, and I've raised with Lisa my concern that they've also taken away the lettering on the front of the building and replaced it with new flashy lettering, which I don't think they have any permission to do. And I don't know whether or not that. Did you raise that with NC? So it's always so. Okay, so it's already.
I've raised it with planning enforcement.
And covering the post box.
And
They're planning permission for covering at the post box.
yeah.
Yeah, so they did get planning permission, but they were stopped because the neighbour in Crackers saw that they were putting wires through, so she reported.
Yeah. That's slightly different.
And planning enforcement came straight out.
Yeah.
So you can't do anything until you've got, but they've gone ahead, even though they've not wired it up, they've gone ahead and changed the sign and the letter and the thing, so I've reported it again.
Yeah.
I think it may be, I'm being generous, it may be their misunderstanding that they don't realise the significance of a listed building in a conservation area.
Yeah, I mean, one might, I suppose it's possible, but it seems to me comparatively unlikely. I just feel that they're almost chancing their arm, but the important thing is we've drawn it to the attention of
That's what
planning enforcement.
No, that's fine.
Lisa will no doubt keep us all updated if she gets any feedback from planning enforcement. And I think it's all just, it's a continuing question of being vigilant. I mean, it's not only that building. We also had highlighted the other day the Rose and Crown, where signage appears, which frankly is out of keeping with its location and its status. Maybe in a next newsletter that goes out, whichever one it is, there should be something from the council talking about the need for owners of listed buildings to seek listed building consent before they make any changes internally or externally to buildings, pointing out that failure to do so could result in immediate enforcement action.
Was it 250? Was it 3? How many listed buildings in town? Roughly.
It's
a lot, isn't it?
I think it's 200 and something or another.
Yeah, but Stanford says it's got 600. And yet we've got over a third of what they have, and
a much smaller place. Yeah. I mean, it's an unusual centre to have quite so many listed buildings, I believe, but I don't know, statistically where we are on, say, league table of density of listed buildings within our environment. But it's terribly important that we get over this message somehow to owners of listed buildings that they can't just do what they want with them. Because if you just think over the last year or two, there were issues around the market hall, where one of their former occupiers, who should have known a lot better, was trying to do things to it which actually required listed building consent.
Is it too much effort to give them a letter? Responsibilities of being an owner of a listed building.
Deliver one to each listed building owner. There would obviously be a cost involved in that.
Yeah, but
but it would, it is certainly a thought. It would have to go on the agenda for full council because we don't have a spending power as a committee, but we could recommend the production of a leaflet and arranging its delivery to each listed building within the town. That is quite, it's quite an enterprise to do. And of course, a number of them will be within school ownership. It's fair to say.
But the school knows, but they still send it.
Maybe raise the issue at full council and see what recommendation comes out of full council.
Yeah. Lisa, if you could ask Emma to do that.
Go into the
Yeah.
newsletter.
Yeah, the newsletter will be a start.
Yeah, we can certainly do that because that
Because that goes to-
doesn't involve expenditure, and I think as a committee, we're perfectly entitled to say,
Do it in the
That
newsletter,
should
see
be
what
done.
reaction it gets, and then maybe take it further.
Yeah, that's probably the better way, the cheaper way.
well, it's certainly a cheaper way. But I can see the merit in what you've suggested. I mean, it may be that, bearing in mind that the next meeting is April, which is the last meeting of the current council, I could imagine it being suggested that the item is deferred
To the next.
to the new council to see if,
Let me do that.
Maybe.
see where we are, because it could be that there is
Pass it on.
considerable personnel change.
Yeah.
On which note, unless there is anything else, Lisa, is there anything?
No.
Well, it's 8:30.
Yeah.
That seems like a very good point at which to stop.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll declare the meeting closed.